Okay, Jeff, are you recording? Okay, can you put that wonderful thing down? Good. Okay, I'll do a quick introduction. Welcome, everyone. This is Chapter 6 in the book, Developing Lean Leaders at All Levels by Jeffrey K. Liker, publisher George Strachilis. And Eda is from Turkey. She's one of our coaches in Turkey. She'll be managing the chat, so anybody has anything, please put it in chat, not Q&A. And Eda will reply and also stop Jeff periodically, maybe 2-3 times would be appropriate, Eda, during the whole presentation. And then we'll leave 15 to 20 minutes or more at the end of the presentation for Jeff to answer specific questions. I'm going to promote everyone to a panelist. So what I'll ask you to do is write your questions down during the presentation, and when I promote you, take yourself off mute, ask the question, and Jeff will reply. Jeff, welcome back. I think it's been over a month and a half, so it's wonderful to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So we're up to Chapter 6, which talks about supporting daily Kaizen. Recall the reason for the book, because this was a book that accompanies the Toyota Way to Lean Leadership, is to provide more practical advice on how to learn from the Toyota approach to developing leaders. The Toyota Way to Lean Leadership developed a model, and we've been through the first 2 stages of the model. The first is each individual leader needs to commit to self-development and go through a process of learning. And what you're learning is to live true north values through repeated learning cycles. That's over and over and again. Over and over again you're going through plan, do, check, act on yourself. But it's difficult to develop ourselves in any complex skill. We need a coach. We need somebody to give outside feedback on when we're on target and off target, and someone who's walked this path before and has some experience and knows what true north really looks like. The values that we put in the center are striving very passionately for a challenge, and doing that through a process, a systematic process of Kaizen, which requires plan, do, check, act, going through all the steps, having a plan, understanding the gap between where you want to be and where you are, systematically through experimentation and checking how you're doing, and checking the data, getting closer and closer to your challenge. One of the ways of collecting data, one of the most important ways, is to go and see firsthand. It's not enough to look only at a statistical display. And we do this as part of teams, and we act in every way with respect toward our customers, respect toward our team members, respect for our society. So this is what we're trying to learn, is how to turn that into a way of living, and we do that with a coach. And the coach needs to not only have self-developed to a certain level, but also have skills to observe others, see what their strengths and weaknesses are, and give corrective feedback. But we've said that the best way of coaching is through questioning. So if I'm a student, you want me to be playing the violin, you want me to be solving the problems with a team, you might want me to be living these values, and then you're there to give me corrective feedback and question me and draw out of me a better approach, step by step by step. The model one of the models we talked about, one of the best developed models for both learning this process of improving toward a challenge systematically and also coaching others, is in the book Toyota Kata by Mike Rother. So we spent a fair amount of time talking about the improvement kata, how we can take this process of plan, do, check, act and break it into small steps that are teachable by a coach who also has a kata, a routine for teaching us. The recommendation from Mike Rother and others working with him is to start top down. In fact, their argument is that that's the only way to be successful, is to start top down. And that begins with what they call an advanced group, a group of senior leaders who actually go through the improvement kata themselves and use it to meet a challenge with a coach, usually an external coach at first, and then they become coaches, and then they monitor the process of developing others who have this ability to improve systematically and then eventually to coach others. So when you have the top layer and they've then taught the middle layer, then you're down to the people who are actually doing the work. You're down to the gemba. And when you get to the gemba, what Toyota's gemba looks like is a bunch of work groups. It's a microstructure that mimics the overall structure of the corporation, and the head of this microstructure is called a group leader. I got this diagram, and I first learned about this from Bill Costantino, who I'll be referring to a few times. Bill was one of the first group leaders when Toyota opened the Georgetown, Kentucky plant. They already had experience bringing the group leader structure to America at Minomi, their joint venture with General Motors, and then in Georgetown they created for the first time the group leader structure in a major assembly plant that was Toyota owned without a joint venture partner. And they intensely developed the group leaders and then the level below them called the team leaders, intensely meaning that every group leader had a full-time coach, a Japanese person who was sent over to teach them for several years, not for once a week or once a month for a year, but for several years. They had somebody whose only reason for coming to America from Japan was to train that group leader. So Bill had a coach like that. And there were also coaches for the team leaders, not necessarily one-to-one, but very intensive coaching. The group leader is the first line of supervision. They have formal authority, for example, to discipline. And the team leaders come from the team members, and they're hourly, in the case of the United States system, hourly production workers who show some extra motivation to want to learn, to want to improve. They make more suggestions. They're more likely to set up a quality circle. They just have something extra beyond wanting to come to work and do the job and leave. And then there are formal training programs for them over long periods of time, over years, and also personal coaching. Now the group leader, when the group leader becomes developed, then they can be a coach for the team leader. The situation that the Japanese faced when they came to America was that they were hiring a lot of people for Georgetown, and everybody had to be trained at once. So they had to simultaneously train the group leaders, team leaders, and team members. Once the system is working and starts to self-replicate, then team members become team leaders who become group leaders, and each level is developing the level below them. So this is really where all the daily Kaizen, what we call daily Kaizen, takes place. It's not all the Kaizen, because there's Kaizen at higher levels, for example, at the material and information flow level or system level, say across a plant. But when we go to a workstation and we look at the details of how it's laid out, and we look at improvements that are made every day. For example, when an Andon is pulled and there's a response and there's a problem, and then at the end of the day we ask, what can we do about that? All of that improvement is happening within the work group. So essentially it becomes like a small business. And the ideal ratio that Toyota has determined for a leader who's acting as a coach and developing others to the people being developed is 1 to 5. So you can control many more people than that if you're not spending a lot of time with each of them developing them. You know, Fred is pretty well developed. He's doing his job. He isn't causing any trouble. He shows up to work on time. I say hello to Fred, ask him how his family is, and then I can leave Fred alone. Susie's doing well. Harry's a problem, so I have to spend more time with Harry. That traditional view of the role of the manager as being a disciplinarian who just wants people to be in the right place at the right time and in control can have a very wide span of control. But if what we're trying to do is on a daily basis develop people and coach them, then you need a much smaller group of people for each group leader. Now if we look at this at a taller level, often the Japanese who are teaching people like Bill Cosentino would actually draw the organization chart upside down. And they would say the team members are the only ones in this factory who are doing value-added work. Therefore, we all have to support the team members. They're on top. Our job is to give them what they need to be successful, to work with them. The team leaders, again, are hourly people. In Toyota's case, they're sometimes online working, sometimes offline, but there are always team leaders offline. So if you have 4 team leaders as a group leader, you may not see 4 team leaders all offline. You might see one of them working a job in production and 3 of them offline, or maybe even 2 of them offline. And that's really up to you as a group leader to manage that, and also has to do with absenteeism and people getting sick and things like that. But again, this is the ideal structure, and then the group leader reports to a manager or assistant manager, and it keeps on going up to the plant manager. Again, you can say it's going down to the plant manager, and everybody's job is to support the team member. Where Kaizen is happening on a daily basis, at a pretty microscopic level, for example, maintaining the standard work and modifying the standardized work when we learn something new. A lot of the details that you'll see are being done by the team leader with the team members, mentored by the group leader. That doesn't mean, again, that that's all the Kaizen that's happening in Toyota, or the most important Kaizen. But that's where the most changes are being made, and most of those changes are small changes. The responsibility of the leaders within the work group, the group leader and team leader as a team of leaders, is number 1, to make sure the operation's staffed, including if somebody doesn't show up to work and we don't know about it till this morning, we have to replace that person. The group leaders have walkie-talkies, and some will have extra people, and some will not have enough people, and they'll do some swapping. And then that has to be managed because you have somebody who may not be trained, who has to be given a light job, an easy job. You need to achieve 100% daily schedule attainment, so at the end of the day when Toyota leaves, virtually every day they make exactly the number of vehicles that they planned on making at the beginning of a shift. There's process support happening in seconds in response to a pull of the cord, the Andon, hourly checks, daily checks, weekly checks. There's a very elaborate system of checks, for example, for maintenance purposes. There's charts and cards and various visual tools that tell you what needs to be done to that machine every day, every week, every month, and that's checked and signed off by the group leader. The team members are trained and also cross-trained. In the case of America, it's typical for a single person to do 4 jobs, to rotate through 4 jobs, once every 2 hours in an 8-hour shift. And then offline is still the best opportunity for developing team leaders, team members, even group leaders in longer-term improvement projects. We want to completely revamp this work, these few jobs, rebalance the line, create better ergonomics, create better lighting, retrain people. It's going to take us 3 months to do that. We will propose that as an offline activity that we'll do in a quality circle that will meet once a week for, say, 3 months, usually after hours. Or it could be that we see a safety problem that a number of people have, and we're not sure what the cause is. So these are the kinds of projects that would make good projects for teaching the improvement kata. In Toyota's case, they use the A3 process, and it's a training process with a coach. The coach would be the group leader, and the group leader would sponsor, say, a team leader who forms a quality circle. The quality circles are voluntary, and there needs to be time during the day for conducting experiments and time for mentoring by the group leader, and the quality circles will get their own kind of special extra coaching. But the quality circles is one of the most fertile grounds for developing team leaders who become group leaders. And in Japan, quality circle voluntary participation is over 90%. In the US, it typically runs in mature plants at around 35 or 40%, which is still a lot when you're dealing with thousands.
So Jeff, obviously in Japan, the quality circles are big, and they're not in North America. What do you attribute that to? I mean, I've heard so many people say that that's what's missing, but what do you attribute that to?
The quality circles in Japan have never ended. It's been continuous since probably the 1950s or 1960s, and it's in the culture. It's just you know, what you do. You know, we come in and drink a cup of coffee. They go to a quality circle meeting, and voluntary in Japan does take on a different meaning. Voluntary can mean I'm obligated, so I might not be punished if I don't participate in a quality circle, but I might feel a sense of obligation, like I'm not doing my job if I don't participate. So voluntary is a different kind of concept in Japan. In the U.S., for Toyota, they believe the quality circle system, which is really offline problem-solving groups, and some plants have used different terms because it's not just quality. It could be safety, productivity, could be any goal. But the general belief within Toyota across the world is that participating in these offline activities by team members and team leaders is one of the best ways to develop people. It's the most powerful way. So it's very, very encouraged, and Toyota makes it work throughout the world. It may not happen in the first year of a new plant, but by year 5 to 10, there'll be a fairly high level of participation, and the projects are the kinds of projects that a lean consultant or a black belt might do. So they could be very sophisticated. They have an elaborate system of rewards for local rewards in the plant level, and then the country level, and then ultimately at the global level, and the winners get meet Akio Toyota, and they get a check, and they get a big plaque, and they fly to Japan. So it's part of the institutional culture in Toyota globally, although it's still stronger in Japan, and partly because in Japan there's this feeling of obligation. In, say, the U.S., it's individuals deciding for themselves, and some are excited and some are not so excited. Now, the problem we had in America is that we didn't have a culture of engaged people who are being developed, who believed that they're part of the team, who saw a superordinate, larger goal of being part of this great company serving society. We didn't have the right culture, so then we superimposed this structure of people having meetings. We taught them basic tools in a very superficial way. They didn't get the intense coaching they get at Toyota, and then we let them loose. And lo and behold, what they did was they worked on a lot of hygiene projects, moving the water fountain closer, working on safety issues, working on lighting, but not getting to core quality and productivity issues. And many companies saw they weren't getting a return on investment and very quickly pulled the plug. So I think the problem in most companies and in North America has been lack of understanding and lack of dedication and trying, and the culture itself, which can't be set apart from quality circles. You don't create the culture by bringing people for an hour a week offline and telling them go solve problems.
Well, you know, when I went to Japan, it became so obvious. The philosophy is built into some companies, and big difference. Like there's a world apart compared to what I thought it would be.
Well,
so pretty amazing.
It's intense. And I had a friend, professor at Hiroshima University, and he taught quality circles, And he was spending a lot of time, this was 30 years ago, he was spending a lot of time in services like hotels. And he couldn't understand why I was having such a hard time in the United States, because he would go in and he would teach quality circles, and he would just talk and talk and talk for hours and hours and hours and show them pictures and diagrams, and then he would say, I'll come back next month, show me some of the results from your quality circles, and he'd come back next month and they'd be showing these great results. And he did nothing except for talk to them for a few hours. I do that in the United States. I come back in a month and nothing's happened at all. So it's quite a different culture, as you say. But Toyota's shown that it can work successfully in the United States, and other companies have done it successfully. But it's the same question of lean, which is how do you develop people so that they have the skills, so that they're motivated, so that they're excited about something beyond doing their job. And that comes from this mentor-mentee chain, and that is that the leaders and the group leaders, and the reason they're so intensively developed is because they're the ones who lead the team to see a challenge that's bigger than them, to see their place in a larger company, to feel like they're a team member, and they're teaching them how to meet goals and targets, and how to use metrics, and about going and seeing, and they've learned how to question and not give answers, and they're teaching that to the team leaders, and they're creating the environment of no blame. If you do your best and you struggle and you fail, there's no blame, as long as we learn from that. And they're teaching PDCA and 5Y and all these things that we teach often maybe in a classroom, maybe the consultant teaches it. These are being taught by the group leader, to the team leaders, who are hourly workers, who are peers, who are then teaching it to their peers. So this chain of command becomes a chain of coaching and learning. When this is going back to Bill Cosentino, again, one of the first group leaders, he then left Toyota. We were consulting together at Ford, developing the Ford production system with Ford. John Shook was there, Mike Rother was there. Bill was one of the best group leaders from Toyota. And then more recently, he's joined up with Mike Rother, and his consulting firm, W3, is dedicated 100% to the improvement and coaching kata. And what he's discovered as he's tried to use the methods of the kata in various organizations is that they don't have the work group structure that he knows intimately and he knows works because he was the group leader. He lived it. So what he sees is that there's a supervisor with 20, 25, 30, even 40 people reporting to them, and then they're coached in the improvement kata, and then they're asked to be the coach to 30 or 40 people, and they simply can't do it. They don't have the bandwidth. And without the bandwidth, then they have so many people, and what they're doing is responding to fighting fires. They're responding to the troublesome team members or to the troublesome machine, and they just don't have time to spend each day doing their coaching, working on their own improvement projects.
Jeff, I got a question on setting up the group leader, like looking at this situation. Somebody managing 32 people, you would say, well, I need about, I don't know, divide that by 6 team leaders to manage the group of 32. When they initially go after and set up the team leaders, I think you suggested at one point in the past, don't do it. Don't change the org structure right away. And was there a reason for that other than finding the right person to be the team leader?
Okay. Well, first of all, anything I say like that is provisional. It depends. So it might be kind of the ideal way in an ideal world, but it may not be practical or the best for any given situation. So, for example, I've also been preaching that we need to start from the top. We need to develop the director of manufacturing to lead this effort. we need the director of manufacturing to develop the next level down, and maybe those are managers of departments. Then they need to develop the supervisors. So while that's going on, it doesn't really matter how the working level people are organized. We're not ready yet to develop the team leaders, because for one thing, the consultants don't have the bandwidth to develop 6 team leaders for each of these supervisors, and now we're talking about 40 or 50 people, so consultants can't do that. So we're working with ideally with the more senior people who are learning, and then we have a train-the-trainer system. So it may not get down to the point where we have the capacity, the coaching capacity, to develop team leaders for the first 2 or 3 years. I was talking to a former vice president of Herman Miller, and they were kind of adopted by Toyota, and they've been working at learning from Toyota for about 12 years in a very serious way, and it's now spread across their plants. For the first 3 years, they were working with Mr. Oba, one of the students of Teiichi Ono and one of the kind of supermen of TPS. He wouldn't say that, but he is. And they said for the first 3 years, he was working with the senior management, and he was working with a small number of individuals that they had picked to be the first to learn the Toyota production system. After 3 years, they were starting to see the systems falling backward, a decay. And then Mr. Oba came, and he would never say many words, and he'd usually ask a question. So he came and he asked, "Are you engaging your team members?" And that one question just threw them, because they realized they weren't. And then the way he explained it to me, they had an offsite, and they took a 180-degree different approach to TPS. At that point, they introduced the team leader system, but they started in one group on a pilot basis, and then began to spread it in one plant. And over a period of the next 9 years, it began to become common within her Miller plant. So it's a long process. But then I asked him, okay, so when Mr. Oba asked you that at 3 years, and then you were shocked, like, oh my gosh, we missed the most essential point involving the team members. We were doing it, management was doing it. Does that mean that you were making a mistake for 3 years? Or do you think Oba thought you were ready? And he said, absolutely, Oba thought we were ready at 3 years. He never would have asked that question when he first came, because we weren't ready. So there's this idea of readiness now, so that often leads to questions like, how do you do a readiness assessment? And I haven't a clue how to do a readiness assessment in a formal sense of measuring things with questionnaires.
Well, that's interesting, because you talk 3 years, companies want this done in 3 months. So I still have that barrier to break. But let's continue, absolutely.
Anyway, this is a problem that Bill sees, and this particular company that he worked with, in fact, has been moving to a team leader structure. He's been working with them for 3 years, and they're doing it well. What he encouraged them to do is use the improvement kata to design your work groups. That is, set a target condition, pick a certain area to experiment with, run a lot of experiments, figure out what the right ratio is, figure out how to develop these people, figure out how long it takes, do all that through the PDCA process. And they've been through about 4 or 5 versions of the team structure already, and they've settled on something that makes sense for them. But so he was arguing, don't copy Toyota, but get the idea that if you want engaged team members, you want engaged workers, then you need intensive coaching, and you're not going to get that with a 1 to 30 or 40 ratio. Okay, other variations that we see of the work group structure are the daily huddles, and many companies have adopted this even after they have gone through their 3 years and they've learned the basic skills and tools, and they have lean things all over, and then they decide we need to engage the people, And we're going to have a metric board, and we're going to have a daily huddle. And this is, again, Bill's slide, and he says often this is damage control and a weather report only. So we're reporting on what happened. If there was some serious problem from yesterday, like a safety issue, we'll deal with that. But it's still not giving you that cadence of daily improvement that we're looking for. And similarly, and I know one company we worked with in particular that in their second year, when they're rolling out their version of the Toyota production system, the vice president leading it globally said, every success case I've seen has work groups with team leaders, so we're going to have work groups with team leaders by the end of the year. And that meant training hundreds of people simultaneously to be team leaders. They simply gave them, essentially it's like giving them business cards. They didn't have business cards, but they created the role, and they wrote a job description, and they got it through human resources, but they didn't have the capability to be team leaders, and it was pretty disastrous.